Hi, hello. Barry Shaw, welcome back to the View from Israel. I'm sure that when you hear in the media about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, you hear sounds about Israeli oppression, Palestinian terrorism. It's all very impersonal for you. Um, as a note of full disclosure, I have to tell you that I was a co-founder of the Netanya Terror Victims Organization. That was when the Palestinians decided to target Netanya for a whole spate of terror attacks. You may, for instance, have heard in the media about the Passover massacre at the Park Hotel. That was just one of many terror attacks that my hometown suffered, and I was involved with helping a lot of the victims of terror getting over their trauma. But as I said, for you, it's probably very impersonal, and that's why this show is special. Today, we're going to show you one of the human face of what it means to be a victim of Palestinian terror and what it's all about. So, welcome to the show, Kay Wilson. Kay,
Barry,
thanks for joining us. Uh, tell us
privilege.
something. Tell us something about your background, Kay. You're Jewish. You're Israeli. You're a tour guide. How did you get into tour guiding when you came to Israel?
Well, when I first made Aliyah in the mid 80s, it was obviously so different from anything England offered. Everything was vibrant, it was colourful. Babies could argue before they could walk, that type of stuff. And having grown up under England's dull skies, Israel was very vibrant. And I loved Israel for all kinds of reasons, because Israel deserves to be loved. And as the years went by and I was doing odd jobs, I met many tourists, and I understood that I'm a communicator. And I thought that my time would be well spent if I could become a guide. And that's what I did. I wanted to like transfer some of the love and appreciation I have for my country towards other people.
And it's a quite intensive course becoming a fully qualified tour guide because you get to know certainly about the beauty of Israel, but you get to know its history, its diversity, and everything through the stones and the trails and everything. You have to actually know the map of Israel in very great detail, correct?
Yeah, there's also yes, it's very wide, it's very broad course. I did mine in Hebrew in Tel Aviv, which actually turned out to be uh, a blessing for them. Although it was difficult, it's not my mother tongue, but it certainly sharpened my Hebrew, and I felt completely comfortable. But I think the upside was I'm still, even though I'm here 33 years, I'm still unable to skip read in Hebrew. So I had to read everything very thoroughly, which actually helped me retain a lot in memory, which might not have
Yeah,
happened if I'd done it in English.
you and me both. Yeah, suffer from the same malady. Um, so tell me, how did you meet Christine? What was her nationality?
She was an American, Christine Luca, an American Christian. I guided a lot of Christians in my time as a tour guide. And I was interested in guiding in Poland as well, historical tours, also to really teach the, well, basically theological anti Semitic roots that in some way contributed to the Shoah or the Holocaust. So I met Christine, and she was part of a group, my first group, where I was like a rookie guide learning to guide historical tours in Poland. And I met her there on the summer of 2010.
Um, okay, tell me about your visit to the Matah Forest. It's not really a forest, is it? It's a woodland with an Israeli nature shade. What are the tourist attractions there?
Okay, so well, we should back up. As a result of the visit to Poland or my work in Poland, I ended up invited Christine to Israel. We were around the same age, and I wanted her to come for a short weekend and just see like the real Israel. You know, where you lenegev hummus, go to jazz clubs, whatever. She comes in December, and we end up the second day. Her second day, we're on a nature trail. You're right. It's not. I mean, we'd call it a forest here. Uh, Bearing in mind that this isn't really oozing with greenery, this land, but it's a woodland. It's a Mediterranean woodland. And the piece I'd chosen to hike with Christine was part of what's called the Israel National Trail, which is this trail that goes through, starts in the north and weaves its way for nearly 1,000 kilometers. So we end up
Ah,
there on a beautiful Shabbat sunny winter afternoon.
yeah. And so while you were hiking on this day, I don't recall, was it you or was it your little terrier that sensed out or saw the two men crouching behind some bushes?
Yeah, when we went up to a viewpoint, and I saw these two people crouching in the bushes from about 20 meters away, and my little dog started growling, and they stood up, and that's when life changed.
Yeah, yeah. It was a life-changing moment. And then you were aware that this something serious was about to happen. I understand that part of what happened is that you were ordered by these guys who came at you to take off your shoes, and they used your shoelaces to tie your hands together.
Yes, I mean, some time transpired between what you're describing and us being on the viewpoint, where I first noticed them. They asked for water in Hebrew, and I told them I
Okay.
didn't have any, and they went away. I answered them in Hebrew, and then I told Christine I didn't sense anything cosmic would happen. I thought maybe they want to steal our backpacks, but I understood that it was important to get back to the car. So we were rushing down the hill, and I took out my little penknife, and they disappeared, and they jumped on us from behind, and that's when I managed to stab one of them in the nuts, and he overpowered me, and then we're held at knife point for half an hour, machete point, and then they find my Israeli ID. We now speak in Hebrew, and yes, they tell us to take off my shoes, and they tie our hands with our laces, and they gag us with Christine's fleece.
Right. And then I'll take this up because it's very difficult, as I think you can appreciate, for Kay to go into it. And then these two Palestinian Arabs began really attacking both Christine and Kay with their machete long knives. Um, like Kay said, she'd managed to stab her attacker with her penknife, which flew out of her hand. And they were really defenseless. They were thrown on the ground, and these Palestinian predators, as I call them, stabbed and hacked them. Now, viewers, I want you to ask yourself, what would you do in Kay's place, a defenseless woman being hacked to death? What would you do? But Kay did a remarkable thing. She decided to play dead. Um, and one of the things she realized that with people playing dead as she was on the ground is people die, she thought to herself, with their eyes open. She put her mind somewhere else. She lay on the ground motionless as the killer continued to stab her. And she lay there with her eyes open, watching her friend Christine die. Now, just to give you some proportion of what Kay suffered in this attack, she was stabbed 13 times. She had several broken ribs. She had punctured lungs and a diaphragm. She had a dislocated shoulder. She had a broken shoulder blade and broken sternum. She was bleeding both internally and externally. She was dying. But back to Kay, lying there, dying, hands tied together, barefoot in the bushes. Where'd you go from there? Miles from anywhere or anybody. What did you do?
Well, I understood, as it turns out, spoiler, I understood wrongly that I was going to be dead within a few minutes. Um, and I don't know what kicked in, but it was very important for me to try and get up and die nearer where I parked the car, just so the police could find my body. I didn't get up to live. I had no idea I'd survive. And I knew we'd parked about half an hour away. Um, Obviously, I was disorientated. I never lost consciousness or anything, but I managed to stand, still gagged and bound and barefoot. And I knew I shouldn't look at the remains of my friend, so I turned my back on her. And I just started, all kinds of things go through your mind. You think of the people you love, that you're not going to see them again, and you listen to the winds that you're never going to hear again, and you smell the pines you're never going to smell again, and everything closes down. But I had in my mind that I must get to the goal, and that's to die near where I parked the car. And somehow I managed. I was also thinking of a piano arrangement of Somewhere Over the Rainbow, because it kind of kept my mind off what had just happened. And I managed to walk over a mile in that terrible state, dying. And I actually found my way back to the car. And there was a couple of families there who called the police, the army, an ambulance, and I was rushed to hospital.
Yeah. Okay, just back up a little bit, because as I understood from you, you had a very frustrating moment. Is that somewhere in the distance, if I understood you correctly, was that there was a family who was packing up, having a picnic or something. You were too weak to shout and everything, and as you were trying to crawl towards this vehicle, they simply got in the vehicle and drove off. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, they didn't see me. And obviously, you're right. Frustrating is an understatement. It's like saying the Second World War was a bit inconvenient. I mean, it was your world is ending, ending, and I can't shout and I can't move the gag because my hands are tied. And at that point, everything was happening in slow motion. And yeah, I was just a few feet away from them. And I think the problem was also the sun was low and it was blinding them. So I would have looked, if they'd have seen me, I would have looked nothing more than a silhouette of somebody maybe taking a very, very slow walk in the forest. Yeah, so they disappeared. And then I started, as irony would have it, I started looking around for a comfortable place to die. And that's when I heard children giggling, and I saw within the distance that there was another family. So it gave me strength to carry on.
Oh. And as a result of that, they managed to bring an ambulance, and you were taken to the Hadassah Hospital trauma unit. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that's right. And I like to joke. It doesn't really cut it in English, but there is a weaker translation. One of the last things I recall before going into the operating theatre was a comment from one Jewish surgeon to his colleague, and he said, "Ya Muhammad, ten lita sakin," meaning, "Muhammad, pass me the knife, pass me the scalpel." So I think it's important to say, yeah, really ironic. Important to say that it was an Arab Israeli surgeon who saved my life. And I was in hospital for a few weeks, and there was a press blackout. Um, by the way, my physical recovery continued for years afterwards. I had over 30 broken bones, mostly around my torso, and I couldn't really do anything on my own, not even sit up. So even though I was released from hospital, the physical and of course the psychological recovery is continuing.
You know, one of the things I love about UK is your powers of observation and your narrative skills, and you've put this in a book, the Rage Less Traveled. Um, Tell us why you decided to write a book about it.
Well, Barry, it's because I've been telling what happened to me for the last 5 years, and I think it's important. Something in Judaism stresses the importance of bearing witness. And I need to testify to the life of my friend, to the death of my friend. I feel a commission almost to speak on behalf of people who are no longer here to speak for themselves. But I also understood that to detail, as I've been doing, to detail what happened time and time and again, it's incredibly difficult for me. It's mentally draining. It might not be difficult, so difficult when I'm actually doing it, but there's like nuclear fallout afterwards. I can be at home then for days, not really good for anything. So I wanted to reinvent the way I did things, and I knew a book. I knew this very early on, by the way, when I started to bear witness. I knew the day would come. So I wrote the book. So if people want to know what happened, they can read the book. And I also wrote it because I think it's a global story. I think it's everybody wants to know deep down inside. We're all inquisitive, right? We all want to know what it's like to die. I can tell you that. I can tell you exactly what goes through a person's mind as he or she, in my case, is being murdered. And that's a very important thing to tell people. It like rearranges our priorities in life. So that was another reason, like, you know, what are we here for? We're here for a breath of time. What really, really is important. And I also wanted to show in my book the, what would you call it? The craziness of this country. What a beautiful country Israel is, people-wise. Don't even mention the scenery. The scenery is gorgeous. But that Israel in her imperfection and in her clumsiness, in this good, always wanted to help. And sometimes it's so awkward you can cringe, all right? But I wanted to show also the frailty and the awkwardness and the good-heartedness of Israel, and in that sense that Israel or Israelis are no different from any other people. We're human beings, and I wanted to write about that too, vis-a-vis my own path back to health.
This is why it's important to have you on the show, because one of the things I wanted to do was really to show the human face of what it's like to be a terror victim. In your case, a victim of Palestinian terror, but there are victims of terror elsewhere in the world, and you're a personification of the human face of what it's like to be not only a terror victim in the negative, but also a courageous and a brave one, and an eloquent one. Let's come back to your story. Tell us about being interrogated by the police in the hospital while you're close to death, because obviously the police wanted to find out what happened to you and who were the perpetrators. What was that like?
First of all, I was look, I was deeply traumatized, obviously. I still had my wherewithal. It wasn't like I was hysterical or didn't know how to communicate. I was, however, traumatized. I think I was off my head with morphine, which was, if I wasn't in so much pain, people tell me it could have been a lot of fun. I was also, yeah, and I was in a lot of pain, incredible pain, despite the drugs, because it was very hard for me to breathe. So every breath was monitored. I mustn't breathe too hard. I mustn't breathe too shallow. And there's just this constant awareness of panic that I wouldn't have enough air, or that I'd breathe too much and my lungs would collapse or whatever. So I was aware of that. But I had a policewoman, an officer, who appears in the book. We're still friends, by the way. We call each other every Rosh Hashanah, and I sometimes see her. An incredibly skilled woman, very sensitive. She knew what details she needed to get. In fact, Israeli TV did a documentary about the attack, and she appears in that. And she says she didn't know that I was going to survive the night. Nobody did. And she needed to get certain details. And apparently, the details that helped were obviously the fact that I told the police I stabbed the guy with my right hand and where I stabbed him, because then they could swab my clothes for his DNA, which is how they were caught. And also, I remembered what cigarettes they were smoking, because I tell you, Barry, at that moment, I wanted a cigarette more than anything else. So I remembered what kind of cigarette it was. I remembered they threw it to the ground. I remembered they made phone calls, which of course is very important in any intelligence investigation. And although I was traumatized while it was going on, I didn't really think we were going to be murdered. I thought we'd be raped, which we weren't, thank God, or beaten up. So therefore, I was taking very good mental details of what they look like. And also being an artist, I have a good visual memory.
I wanted to interject because only somebody like Kay Wilson, who was about to suffer the most horrendous terror attack, says she thought she was going to be raped, but she wasn't, thank God, as if the alternative was better. Back to you, Kay.
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting comment because everything changes. I like to say haven't really found a way of articulating what happened, but we're talking about just 30 minutes in the forest where I aged 2 generations. All right, um, where everything that you knew is ripped away. The person you thought you were is no longer. It's your past is gone. Your future is is unknown. Well, like everybody's future, and the present is also distorted. So the comment that you observed is right. It's. I mean, I'll give you another example. I broke my wrist. I was out with the dogs. Dogs pulled me over. I broke my wrist. It was terribly painful, and I'm thinking it's only a broken wrist. Now, if that had happened like 9 years ago, 10 years ago, I'd have probably been the biggest drama queen out there. But I'm just thinking it's only a broken wrist. Or if I break both my legs, it's only broken legs. So everything has a new perspective about it. And I think that's true with every terror survivor.
The viewers can learn a lot from Kay's perspective on life. Kay, tell me a bit about there's a character in your book that appears in your book, the ranger from the Matah Forest, the nature trail. Tell us about him and his visit to you in a hospital.
Okay, so the police sent, it was quite funny because obviously I don't have a very Jewish name, and Christine certainly doesn't. She wasn't Jewish. So there was some mix up in the beginning of the first moments I got in hospital. They thought I was a tourist. So the police, just the initial policeman where you want to get your name and stuff, he's speaking to me in English, and I just thought I'm dying here, and I don't think this is the appropriate time for you to be practicing your English. So they couldn't get. And I was too shocked or traumatized to just move the conversation or the disparity of the conversation to Hebrew. So they sent this Gidi Bashan, who is the ranger of the whole of the Judean mountains, the national parks. And Gidi only knows Hebrew. So I was very relieved to be doing this in Hebrew. Now, they had to locate Christine's body. And so for him, like how do you locate a body in a very, very vast area? I mean, I could give them approximately how long I'd walked for. I knew I'd walked east. Um, so I gathered some things as a tour guide. I knew what kind of trees there were there and what trees grow high up on the hill, what trees grow down on the hill. But he was also a very, very skilled man. And he managed to ascertain exactly where we were when we were attacked because I was telling him that we could actually, what we could see from the viewpoint. And so by deciding that I could see this and not this, he understood a much closer vicinity of where it happened. So along with him and the police officer, Gidi and Lilach is the lady's name, I was awarded, I merited, thank God, some very kind, intelligent, super sharp people who could get the necessary details that they needed.
And based on that, they found Christine's body, I understand.
Yeah, they found it at first light. I mean, the attack happened. It happened in the day, obviously daylight. But by the time I'd got back to the picnic table, the sun was setting. There was a search party sent out immediately. But her body, it was called off. There's lots of volunteers. There was about 400 volunteers. There was the army, the dogs, the police. But her body, the search party was called off, and then her body was relocated, or it was located rather at first light when the search party renewed.
Yeah. So you're still bedbound in hospital in a lot of pain, and then you get a call, your first call from Christine's father, and you say that the call from Christine's father changed everything. What did you mean by that?
Well, once again, to like state my mental state at the time. When somebody's traumatized, they engage in something called avoidance, meaning even though it's really not maybe conscious behavior, but you think about everything rather except what happened. You just can't think about what happened. So I was thinking of it was like manic, your mind is working all the time. Just don't think about this, don't think about what happened, don't think about what happened. And then Christine's father, look, I hardly knew Christine, and then her father calls in hospital, just basically to say they wanted to touch base and they're so sorry and they don't blame me. And I won't forget that, and I still can't forget it. First of all, you hear the voice of a parent who's had their child murdered. There's, and I speak as a musician. There's a tone to bereaved parents that can't be emulated by anybody else. And just to hear a father, so torn up. And at that point in time, I don't feel like this now because of therapy. I felt like it for years, but I've worked through it. I felt it was my fault. I felt, even though he called and said, it's not your fault, Kay. But when you're traumatized, you don't think logically. And I understood that if we hadn't gone for a hike, if I'd have planned something else, then Christine would still be alive. So that was the catalyst. That really enhanced the PTSD. It pushed survivor's guilt off the charts, which I battled with, really battled. I don't use that word lightly. Battled with for years. I think it's common, this guilt. It's common amongst people who've witnessed the death of a friend, or it's common amongst Holocaust survivors or other people who've survived terrorism. It's common amongst vets. I mean, so that was it. That conversation with the father was the beginning of another monstrous effect of what this attack did to me.
I can tell you, Kay, from my experience with the terror victims here in Netanya, and the trauma they have of trying to escape the reliving of the incident all the time. And some of them always remarked to me that they were almost like scared of going to sleep because they were afraid of actually reliving the event by dreaming of it in their sleep. So they were sort of having this trauma going on during the day of trying to block out what had happened, but also trying to avoid sleep because they would be scared of dreaming about it, having nightmares about it. I guess you had that sort of experience as well.
Well, for some bizarre reason, I've never had, and it's probably because I don't sleep, really. I tend to nap today. I'll take an hour here, hour there, 2 hours there. I don't really, because I can't. And I don't think it's fear. But I've never actually had a nightmare about what happened. And I'm very thankful for that. I've had flashbacks, many, 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 thousands. But I did have one nightmare and it reoccurred. And to me, it was, I mean, first of all, what's a nightmare? The reality is worse than a nightmare. I mean, nothing could be worse than the reality. So the nightmare I had, which I felt was incredibly cynical and unkind, whoever is responsible for our nightmares, I dreamt it was just a dream. I woke up thinking, Christine it was only a dream. It wasn't true. Thank God for that. And then you realize that those responsible, my subconscious, was lying to me. And this fact that I dreamt that it didn't happen and it was just a dream, and the realization that it was actually a reality, it was a very, very bitter experience. So that's the kind of nightmares I've had. Uh,
Wow.
yes, it's a very, very nasty. I would rather dream the reality, to be honest.
Wow.
Because another
Now,
thing with the PTSD is that you have something called disassociation. You cannot believe it happened. I would go around telling myself it can't be true. It can't be true. So you don't feel part of this world. You feel like you can't connect. It didn't really happen. So when you get a dream confirming that it didn't really happen, and then da just kidding. Yeah, it was really
uh,
nasty.
let me ask you about another character in your book, Agent Oscar. Who was he?
Well, Agent Oscar, at first I thought he was Oscar Peterson when he came to the hospital because I was busying myself with this avoidance and playing music on my stomach, playing with chords and thinking of Oscar Peterson. And this guy walks in, he's tall, very white. Oscar was a black Canadian pianist. And he had a jug ears and a bad haircut. And he says in Hebrew, "My name is Oscar." And I thought, how weird. Oscar Peterson doesn't speak Hebrew. And then after all who have like grade one haircuts and sunglasses, even though it was like 2 o'clock at night. And it turns out they're the Israeli security agency, the Secret Service, the Shin Bet. And they also needed some details. And once again, all I can do, Barry, is point to every official who dealt with the investigation and in the trial. As Israelis, we're very hard sometimes with our own people, very critical. And I'm not quite sure that's always a healthy thing. And we're reticent to say the good things. But I can say that the state attorney, they've all dealt with me with such sensitivity and in such a way that I wanted to tell them everything anyway. Not that I had anything to hide, but they were wonderful. They were all wonderful.
Talking about wonderful, you have a wonderful story about Rabbi Feinstein and his wife actually driving on the Sabbath, on Shabbat, to visit you at the hospital. Can you explain to me how a rabbi and his wife would actually drive on Shabbat to come and visit you in hospital?
In the book, and it just shows the plurality of Israel and the diversity and the willingness to help. So this couple, I mean, haven't been particularly religiously observant beyond Hagim and holidays and festivals. This couple, they decided they would drive and see me on the Sabbath on Shabbat because they cited Jewish law, pikuach nefesh, which means if you are going to, in order to save a life, that's when you can break Jewish law. And breaking the Sabbath, driving on the Shabbat is not kosher. But they understood that a visit from them to me is critical to saving my mental health. And indeed it did. And they visited day upon day upon day, just for 5 minutes, just for 10 minutes. And I think that was remarkable. And that was a beautiful expression of Judaism to me. Very, very beautiful, very meaningful, and very life-saving and affirming.
Well, Kay, you went through the physical side of your trauma. You had the most horrendous injuries. How are you today physically?
Can I tell my favorite joke to answer that question? Two Jewish ladies in a restaurant, okay, and the waiter comes up and he says, "Hello, ladies, is anything okay?"
I
So
see.
how am
Okay.
I? Look, I'm not in pain. I'm not true to I'm in pain. I'm just uncomfortable. I feel physically uncomfortable. I feel like, a Jack in a box. Those toys where the doll is stuffed in a box. That's what I feel like. I feel like my body is stuffed in something, and it needs to. It's just always uncomfortable, but it's not pain. Unless I do certain movements, and then I'm in a lot of pain. But I've learned to monitor and can't do this, can't do that. So I'm good.
Well, the physical side is only one part of being a terror victim. The other trauma is often deeper, and by that I mean the psychological scars. Can you talk about a little about that? You went from the Hadassah in Kerem, the hospital, to the In Kerem mental health clinic. I think you've got some things you could share with us on that aspect of the trauma you went through at that time.
Yeah, I think, I mean, for me, the psychological scars, wounds, is significantly more terrible and lifelong than 13 machete wounds. Uh, so there's still, obviously, today, I mean, nothing, it's not like I was in a machete attack and and everything's fine, because it's not. There's progress. Every day there's progress. And sometimes there's not progress. Sometimes I go 2 days, 3 days back. But I did go to Hadassah Hospital, the mental health clinic. I did a couple of types of therapy called cognitive behavior therapy and gradual exposure therapy. And regarding the extent of the trauma, I mean, I'm not saying my terror attack is worse than others. Terror is terror is terror. There were simply aspects to the attack I suffered, which not everybody has when they're a terror survivor, meaning we were held at knife point for half an hour. And that exacerbates PTSD. The longer you face death, the more off the charts your PTSD would be. It's also a knife, it's not a gun, all kinds of stuff. And they're murdering me, and I'm watching the person being chopped up. So there are all kinds of aspects that magnified my own PTSD. And given that, the actual therapy I did in hospital was relatively short. It was 3 months, once a week, and I was very cynical about it. I thought nothing's gonna help me, but it did. And cognitive behavior therapy, which I was shown how to. It's basically this: that your thoughts determine your feelings, not the other way around. Meaning, I had felt until then that it was my fault because I went on a hike with Christine. All right. But if I can think about it more rationally, then that would affect the way I felt. So that was one type of therapy. The other, which now, 9 years later, I am definitely in a different place, was gradual exposure. And I couldn't even look at a tree because it happened in a forest. I couldn't look at a tree. I couldn't, listen to a bird. Couldn't smell pine air freshener, all these things. And so I had to just find a tree once a week and look at it for a few seconds. Let's say start off with 5 seconds, and the next week I had to do it for 6 seconds. And by doing that, I eventually, like I can say, I've been back to the site quite a few times. I'm not spooked. It's just, it was a very important type of therapy. But there are still obviously psychological things I struggle with. I don't like noise. I have much lower mental capacity than I would like. I don't really like leaving my home. If I have to, I will. And I have to monitor when I'm going out. If it's too much traffic, I won't travel in rush hour. That kind of thing. So it's the mental energy is very, very hard to deal with. The lack of mental energy. Very frustrating.
One of the things, Kay, I never got an answer to, or I never really asked you about it, but it occurs to me. When you went for this walk with Christine, you took your little dog with you. I never found out what happened to the dog because you were staggering away. Where was the dog at? Or did you get your dog back?
Yeah, it's funny because whenever I talk about the book or what happened, and I say the dog was stabbed, and she was stabbed. She was stabbed in the leg. But I tell people the dog was stabbed, and the whole room will collapse with emotion. And I'm thinking the irony. I've just told you how many times I was hacked at with a machete, and a Jack Russell gets stabbed in the knee. Anyway, it was sad, but she got stabbed, and she made her way back with me to the picnic table where I was rescued. And the paramedic actually then he dropped me off at the hospital, and then he went back to the forest in his ambulance to find the dog. He found her. I took her home and stitched her up, and she stayed with him. She had a nice little vacation with the paramedic until I was able to come out of hospital.
So you got the dog back?
I did.
Oh, that's a happy end to that part of the story. Should I tell you also what's... Go ahead.
There's a sad, but I'm not going to give the spoiler. The people are going to have to buy the book to understand the importance of the part the dog played.
All right, that's good. Good reason. Viewers, buy the book. All right, but I'll tell you another thing that's unusual about Kay Wilson, because Kay, I think you called it the religious trifecta. I don't think anybody could get away with what you did in insulting Jews, Christians, and Muslims in one go and end up in a police station eating cake.
You're not going to give away all my book, are you, Barry?
No. But this is one of the amazing things about Kay, where, for instance, she becomes the only person in history who assaults a Jewish police officer, lashes out at Christian tourists in Jerusalem, and screams nasty things of Jerusalem, and just get rewarded with a piece of cake in an Israeli police station. All right.
That's
so
true.
If you don't talk about this,
I will elaborate on this a little bit. It was I was in Jerusalem. I just come out of therapy, and I heard the, what do you call it? The muazzin. How do you say that?
The imam from the mosque. Yeah, the minaret.
Like blasting out. Yeah. And it just freaked me out, and I don't remember what I did, but I started lashing out and hitting people, and next thing I know, I find myself in a police station, and once again, for some bizarre reason, the police insist in interviewing me in English. I mean, I don't get it. It's like I'm here more years I'm here than I am whatever was in England. But and then he realizes, because I slipped to Hebrew, the policeman realizes I'm not a tourist, and but he's very, very angry that he thought I was pretending to try and get away and not own up to assaulting tourists and a policeman who tried to arrest me. And he still doesn't know what happened, and I didn't have the wherewithal to even say what had happened. And then when he comes to take my name for a statement, he recognizes, because it'd been on the news just an hour ago, and he recognizes my very English name. And so instead of like charging me with assault and screaming nasty things about Muslims and Allah, he gets all his policemen in the office, and we celebrate the capture of terrorists with a piece of cake. And as he rightly said, he said, you are the only person in the history of Israel who has assaulted Christian tourists, said nasty things about Muslims, scratched a Jewish police officer, and been rewarded with a piece of cake. So that was a very, very crazy time.
Okay, going from the humorous to the more poignant. September the 11th, you're meeting with Christine's parents for the first time.
Yes, that really was a September the 11th. I won't give a spoiler, but I'd met them the night before and said something very incredibly stupid, probably one of the most stupid things I've ever had the privilege of saying in my life, which just exacerbated my shame and guilt, and it got off to a wrong start. But once again, it's really important to say that Christine's parents have only been kind and gracious and somehow risen above what they must be feeling to reach out to me. But yeah, it was meeting them, and we were in court together, Jerusalem's Regional Court, which is a very, very small building. It's Israel at its best and its worst. Rather chaotic. You know, the way the trial was conducted doesn't really befit the severity of the crime. People bumbling in and out, moaning about the price of coffee in the vending machine. Judges looking all very informal, and I'm sitting 15 feet, 5 meters away from these thugs who tried to murder me. And it was just, it was so informal. Uh, it was bizarre on every single level. I think I could write a whole book about the trial without even going into details of the legislation and what happened in the trial. But just what a peculiar experience it was. It was very heartwarming, especially when they didn't have an English translator for Christine's parents. So the whole courtroom, all the 40 people who just strolled in to see what's happening with a couple of terrorists, they all started saying, "Oh, I learn English, I know English, and I can help." And you have this good-heartedness, this willingness to help. But it's nothing. I learned that trials in Israel, it's nothing like you see in the movies. It's nothing like in Europe. It's nothing like in the United States. It just seems to be part of what goes on here.
I want to touch on justice a little bit later in the in our chat, Kay. But there's another interesting point I wanted you to talk about, and that is the fact that the action that you took at the time of actually stabbing your attacker and the DNA actually led this Palestinian terrorist to have been proven guilty of actually committing another murder of a woman called Netta. Could you tell us about the link from the action that you did and what brought the Shin Bet and the Israeli intelligence to actually not just arrest him for assaulting you because you weren't murdered, but actually linking him to an actual murder a little time before that?
Yes, so there'd been a murder, you rightly said, of a lady called Netta Blatsorek in the vicinity where we were attacked, like 10 miles away. She'd gone to a monastery. She was Israeli Jewish, and she'd gone to a monastery for a retreat. A lot of Israelis go there, and she just disappeared into thin air, and they found her body, and she'd been strangled and stabbed. But her murder, like you say, it was unsolved. They didn't manage to apprehend the assailant, although they put together some intelligence and they realized that the person they were looking for, they needed to swab him for DNA, would be this terrorist who actually murdered Christine, would be this Kifach Hinimat, but they couldn't get hold of him. So in me stabbing the terrorist, I actually stabbed his partner. Okay, that's the one I stabbed. And his blood was on my sleeve. They swabbed my sleeve and they got a match in the DNA bank. So arresting him was pretty easy. And I'm sure the Shin Bet or the police or the prisoner services did everything they could to elicit a confession out from this terrorist who was his partner. So that's why it led to the arrest and the location of this Kifach Hinimat. So it's an interesting thing because, yes, the murderers of Christine Luken were arrested and sentenced, but also that little tiny act of stabbing, that little tiny microscopic piece of DNA, finally gave some peace of mind also to Netta's family. Because I can't imagine what it's like to have a child murdered, let alone have your child murdered and the assailant be running free. So it did bring some kind of measured peace of mind to the parents and the husband of Netta Blatsorek. And ever since we've become friends, by the way, I go to their house in Chagim, and it's like Dina, the mother of Netta, she's absolutely right. She says, "Look, we're family. We're related by blood, not
literally.
Yeah,
literally. You know, I'm preparing, I'm researching, preparing an article of what I call Palestinian predators, because there are various types of terrorists who do things for all sorts of causes. But there is a long list of what Palestinian predators are people to go out with a gun or a knife and lay in wait, waiting to kill, in our case, a Jew. and it happens repeatedly.
ليش جيتوا على المنطقة هاي؟
جينا نقتل.
تقتل مين؟
يهود.
ليه؟
بس هيك جينا نقتل.
شو السبب؟
ما في سبب.
ما في سبب.
But Kay, when it comes to talking about the ones who attacked you, the predators who attacked you, were you well enough to attend the hearings? And what was your feeling, not just your court experiences, but your feeling at actually going into, as you described it, the courtroom, that small room, and actually seeing your attackers and Christine's killers there in the same room?
Wow, it was a volcano. What I was actually feeling I didn't actually allow myself to act out what I was feeling. I hated them. If I'd have had a knife, I would have slashed them up happily with a smile on my face. The rage. That's why I called my book "The Rage Less Traveled." That was the predominant emotion, just hate and rage. Although, like, I was sitting on my hands, not to enact what I felt. Like I said, they were sentenced. They got life sentences. That won't bring back the dead. I can only be thankful that they're behind bars, and they should stay behind bars. But one thing, you asked me about the feelings, and I did call the book on purpose "The Rage Less Traveled," because we live in such a weird world where the worst thing you can apparently do is hate. You mustn't hate, or you mustn't hurt somebody's feelings. And I say bullshit. Of course we should hate. We should rage. We should rage against evil. We should hate those who try to maim. And you talk about predators. It is predatory. And it's exactly, we can say it's Amalek. They come for the weak, and they come for, stabbing in the back. I mean, how low, how morally decadent can you be? And by allowing myself, by owning my right to rage, and it is my right, and it's the only normal and moral response to such a heinous crime, by allowing myself and owning it and saying, this is the right way to go, I don't actually think about the murderers anymore. I don't feel, if that's the right thing to say, my life isn't dictated by my feelings. I don't feel I hate them. That doesn't mean to say I forgive. I will never forgive. It just has a way of playing itself out. Like, okay, that's it. But I choose consciously to rage, in the sense I choose to always try and pursue justice, to do everything I can to make sure that these savages will never get out of prison. I'm doing everything I can to make sure that these sick execution stipends that they get, which are funded by Western governments, I'm doing everything I can to make sure that that will stop. So my rage or hatred towards them isn't a visceral feeling anymore, and I don't think it was wrong that it was. It's simply a way I choose to act out how I spend my time, that they would have peace while I'm alive.
So, okay, let's talk a little bit more about justice. I mean, in your book, you mentioned about Gilad Shalit, who was the Israeli soldier who was captured by Hamas and released, but he was released in an exchange by the release of hundreds, thousands or more, of Palestinian terrorists with blood in their hands. And as you say, you've been also campaigning governments against the Palestinian pay-for-slay policy of rewarding people. I would guess your attackers and Christine's killers are sitting in jail, but are receiving money from the Palestinian Authority, rewarding them for their crimes because they look on them as heroes and martyrs. So tell us more about your involvement in in the injustice of this, and why you write about it in the book.
Okay, I mention it only in the epilogue, like in a brief paragraph. Well, first of all, you can probably tell by my speech, my accent. I'm British, all right, and so I've maintained my British passport, dual citizen. And although I'd never want to go and live back in Britain, Israel's definitely my home. It is outrageous that the monies, I mean, Britain has given millions of pounds to the Palestinian Authority, and they can say, the British government can say, look, it only goes to engineers and doctors. It's like, well, they've never asked, maybe up until now they're changing things, I don't know, but there's no accountability. And Mahmoud Abbas, the leader of the PA, he says openly, 7% of their general budget, and their general budget is formed up out of this over $70 billion of foreign aid. 7% of the general budget goes on martyrs, or what he calls martyrs, which are these thugs, these cold-blooded thugs who've murdered innocent people. So the fact that the likes of the British government are not outraged enough to just even suspend funding until there's accountability. In fact, they did suspend funding, Barry, under a lady called Priti Patel. And I was pleased to see her appointed to some position or other. I think she's Home Secretary now, I'm not sure. But she suspended the funds a few years ago because of this outrage. And then, of course, she did the unforgivable sin. She met with Israeli leaders off the record to actually help Syrians in Israeli field hospitals. So she had to resign from her post for, scheming with Zionists, I suppose. And so her suspension of funds was then reinstated. And I've been badgering the British government. I've written to every single MP. I've sent them photos of my stab wounds, which were appalling injuries. And I've received something like 6 replies. Oh, we're really sorry. Just be reassured that the British government is doing everything it can to work towards a 2-state solution. Barry, I wasn't writing to them about a 2-state solution. I was writing to tell them that my family, who are still in England, via their taxes, my family are paying money to my would-be murderers. That's why I was writing. But they're like on automatic. 2-state solution. Like, don't you have some integrity? Can you not just refer to me, relate to me as a human being, rather than giving me your political spiel every time? Take accountability, and it's outrageous. Having said that, President Trump, with the Taylor Force Act, America have stopped it. Thank God for that. Holland have reduced their funding. And so, Palestinian Media Watch have been very, very instrumental in doing this. And I've had the privilege to travel with Itamar Marcus and address foreign governments. And we've seen some results, but the British are stubborn. Maybe after their little Brexit crisis, then things will be different.
Yeah, well, you and I, Kay, have got to keep up our efforts because as each week goes by, it seems to be increasingly likely that Britain could be seeing a Corbyn-led government replacing the Conservatives. And we both know that Corbyn has said repeatedly that Hamas and Hezbollah are his friends, and he is vehemently not just anti-Semitic, but anti-Israel. So our efforts have got to carry on that. I know you've spoken at rallies in London. I know, as you said, you've spoken to British members of Parliament. So your message there to them. Are you also the subject of an Israeli documentary in 2018? Did the BBC, Sky News, has anybody else covered your story in the media in Britain or elsewhere? Has the British media, in fact, ever interviewed you about your experiences and your message?
Wow, that's a big question. The Daily Mail, okay, we'll start with the newspapers. The Daily Mail and the Daily Express and the Daily Mirror have all interviewed me, okay, but in the broader context of British funding, and I was very grateful for that. Now, coming to the media, the BBC, I'm still trying to find a good word to say about them. They have nice nature programs, but beyond that, I did have an opportunity to speak to them because they were going to do a short program on Israeli survivors of terrorism. And also they were going to interview Palestinian families who were receiving money because their relatives carried out these terror attacks. You know, always have to make sure it's a balanced report. And so I was all set up. And then the BBC guy called back and he said, "We've decided against it. You're too well known." And I thought, that's ridiculous. And I told him on the phone, I said, "That's obscene. What you want is a Israeli who's not articulate, who has a foreign accent, who looks brown, who looks typically Middle Eastern, because you want to make sure that there is no connect between your audience and the person speaking. The last thing you want is a British Israeli woman, not particularly looking Jewish, who your viewers could relate with." And it's disgusting. So the BBC flatly refused. Sky News are just, it's crickets. But I tell you what happened is also I'd wanted to be on LBC. And I'd written to Maajid Nawaz, who I was a big fan of. I'd read his book, sort of very interested man. I mean, he never emailed back, never responded. And I never understood why. And then, actually, it was at my book launch, Barry, which you came to, that evening, a friend of mine said, "Look, on LBC, they're talking about PTSD, people who've suffered terrorism in Britain, like London Bridge. Why don't you try and get online?" And I'd got other things on my mind, but I managed to get through. And I spoke to, I can't remember the guy's name, Ian somebody, and it wasn't Ian Dale. And it took them by surprise. It completely took them by surprise. The interviewer was very courteous. And afterwards, he said it was the most remarkable story and interview he's ever heard in his radio career. And he allowed me to say also that the Palestinians were being funded by British money, the Palestinian terrorists. So that was, it was one of those instances that was off the cuff, where I managed to get on national radio. But other, like planned interviews, no, the mainstream media don't want anything to do with me. And I don't understand that. I don't understand it really, because I always speak highly of the Muslim surgeon. I've hidden Muslim young men in my house. I'm working with a Palestinian, volunteering on a project to help educate children there. So I don't get it really. It just does it boils down, as I see it, to really just an anti-Semitic position.
Listen, viewers, if any of you have any influence with your mainstream media in your country, not just Britain, others as well, Europe, wherever, I urge you to speak to whichever contacts you have, journalists, people, talking heads in studio, producers or whatever, to have them make contact with Kay Wilson and have them hear her story, and particularly with the aspect of your governments in whichever country you live in, who are funding the Palestinian Authority and directly, I would say directly rather than indirectly, helping fund the Palestinian pay-to-slay policy, which, as Kate quite rightly said, Mahmoud Abbas said it's an integral part of their budget. So if you could do that, this program would have been of immense benefit on this score. But Kay, back to you. Let me end on one thing. I want to hear more about your Yellow Brick Road project. What can you tell me about your Yellow Brick Road project? And why the name Yellow Brick Road?
Well,
Wizard
they
of
have
Oz?
to read the book. Yes, in the book, The Rage Less Traveled, the memoir, The Wizard of Oz, bizarrely, it's a theme, a sub-theme, because actually when I was dying, I was composing this arrangement in the forest, this musical arrangement of Somewhere Over the Rainbow. So obviously that's taken from the movie. And because what happened to me is all a little dreamlike, I'd used that as a subtext, just very, very subtly in the book. So the project I've started, it's amazing. It is amazing because I had a lot of Palestinians contact me over the last few couple of years, let's say 3 years, and they say, we really thank you that you don't blame us all. We ourselves are suffering under Mahmoud Abbas. We are shocked with what happened to you. And I met a young man, a super sweet guy, who's got his master's in applied English. And we got together in a safe place, in Gush Etzion, and we got talking, and he's from a refugee camp, which I obviously can't name. And he said he wants to, he's very concerned about the incitement and the negativity, and of course the incentive, the financial incentive. And he wants to stay where he is and change things from within, because he, although culturally Muslim, he's not religious. He understood that his world view changed when he learned English. Like, it wasn't what they were telling him. So Jewish people are not monsters, that kind of thing. So he said he wants to, what he really wants to do is have something for children after school that would be an educational club. And as we got talking, it was like, yes, obviously English is the key. And teaching them music as a musician, if we teach people music, they can learn to empathize. It does something with your feelings, and teaching them courage and to think for themselves. And then I realized this is just like the Yellow Brick Road. A little girl goes on a journey, and through companionship, she discovers intelligence, which would be this scarecrow. She discovers empathy, which would be the Tin Man, and she discovers courage, which is the lion. And I thought this is perfect for these kids. So we have through it's all voluntary. Okay, I know a lot of people, a lot of dear people, and lawyers set up a 501c3 in America called the Yellow Brick Road. And we have to obviously find a way, or we're finding ways to raise money or get grants, and then take that money and divert it so that the Palestinian Authority doesn't find out that it's about Jews are behind this, because they kill my friend. And we're running a pilot season now, and it's a little club after school. We hired a little building, did it all up, put it into classrooms. We have music, we have English lessons, and my friend, every few days, he sends a video of the children's activities, and it's beautiful and it's very moving. And I think if what we're doing can help one person, one child grow up, if they can learn to respect themselves and appreciate their own lives, they're going to, God willing, appreciate the lives of Jewish people too. I mean, it might be a pipe dream, but I think it's worth a try. And it's not one of these NGOs where we have anybody who's not actually in the camp. No, let me rephrase that. Only those in the camp will be on some kind of a salary. Everything else is volunteer. So you don't have any hierarchy that is raising money and having a salary. So it's very much a grassroots project. And if any of your viewers also know any good people who want to contribute, then I'd be thrilled. Because every single cent, every single shekel goes to the people who need it on education.
A very important message. Really, Kate Wilson's message from this show is the road less traveled leads to hope. Kate, is there any sort of website or link or to the Yellow Brick Road project, or can people get in contact with you at your email address?
Yes, you can. We do have a website. Do you know what? I can't remember it. I'm going to have to give it you, and Lawrence will have to put it on.
All right.
You can.
We can put your name here.
You can get to it through the Rage Less Traveled, but I'll make sure you get it afterwards, for sure.
Okay, fine. And where can people get the book? Where is it available from? Is it Amazon? Steinmatsky is in Israel? Where?
Oh, that's another subject, Barry. It's just too easy to talk to. No, it's only available from Amazon.
And buy a copy of her book. Kate, I want to thank you for being on the show. I have to tell you, as I'm concerned, this is perhaps the most significant program I've ever done on The View from Israel. Your perspective, I think, has opened the eyes of hundreds, if not thousands of people that will be watching this video. And we appreciate your courage, your heroism, and the road you're on right now, which is one of positivity and hope.
Thank you,
Thank
Barry.
you for being here. Thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, that's Kay Wilson. In my eyes, a heroine. And I'm delighted and honored for her to be on. And thank you for joining me, Barry Shaw, on The View from Israel. Thank you.